talking there about trauma talks. What's that?
So Trauma Talks is a 16-week talk series. So it has 16 videos, 16 workbooks. It's designed by the Compassion Prison Project in America. So I made a connection with them a couple of years back, and I brought them over to Ireland and got them involved in the prisons up here in the north and stuff. And then I started facilitating it out in the community. So basically, trauma talks. So it's how your trauma talks tell you, basically, James. The way the program's designed, it's the first 4 weeks is like what is trauma, ACEs, symptoms of trauma, developmental trauma, and then it goes into more interventions. How it links to violence, accountability, responsibility, but it's just laid out in a way that what I'm experiencing is people reconnecting back to the core of themselves, because a lot of people, myself included, for a long time in my life, always looked externally to fill myself up, you know. And it wasn't until I completed trauma talks a good number of years back and really started seeing myself and seeing the value in myself, the worth in myself, the self-esteem, self-respect. And I was able to look back in and go, I'm in control of all this. Nothing outside of me can ever fill it. No amount of drugs, no amount of sex, no amount of violence, no amount of, reputation, whatever way you want it. But it's very, very good program.
Yeah. Did you ever read the In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts by Gabor Mate?
I did. Yep.
So he talks about people using sex, drugs, alcohol, shopping to fill a void, a hungry hole that will never get filled by that external stuff. That's an inside job. It's kind of what you're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah. So it was basically just lockdown. I decided lockdown for me was right. I'm going to get myself really in a good space here. I'm going to work on myself. So I bought all Gabor's books. It was like a collection.
Yeah.
And I just stopped reading through them, James, and then following him on a video. And then I heard him saying something, and it really, really resonated with me. And it was, we talk about poverty, and poverty. We look externally at poverty, and a lot of us have come up through poverty and stuff, myself included. But poverty and no finances, possibility of homelessness if you can't pay your rent, food, clothes, all the essentials. And we look outside for that poverty, but he talks about the inner poverty. And without working on the inner poverty, you're always only going to see poverty on the outside, as within, so without. So when I was going, what's that mean? And then I started getting into it more. And what it means is all the unworthiness you have, the narrative of being stupid, not enough, not loved, ugly, fat, skinny, whatever your narrative is about, until you sort that poverty story out, it'll always be, you'll always only ever see poverty. And that really hit me, like, and that's when I started really delving deep in.
Yeah, because some of the richest people can be some of the unhappiest people.
You ever watch that guy, DG Mindset?
Yeah.
So he talked about it there just recently in a podcast, and I was like, there's really something in that. He says he works for guys who are making tens of millions of dollars a year. Like they're making major money, but they always go back to the poverty within, not feeling good enough, not feeling worthy enough, and the money doesn't make them happy. I was always a perpetual believer. The more money you have, the more happier you are, but it's certainly not true. Like,
No, but I think if you have, let's say if you're living a legitimate life where you're not hurting anybody, you're not stealing from anybody, and you're providing for your family or yourself or whatever, and then you're able to get employment and work your way up the ladder or build a business or whatever. I think if you have abundance and if you're comfortable that way, I think that can help your happiness, because you've worked for it and it's not too much, it's not too little, it just helps you get by comfortably. But if you're, let's say look at Marcus Rashford, just because he's in the news at the moment, right? He's throwing his ties out of the pram at Man United. He wants to leave because he got dropped. He's on £350,000 sterling a week. And he's talking about he had a tough life when he was younger and that he needs a new challenge. And it doesn't matter how much. You could give him $500,000 a week. He looks miserable. He's walking around as if he's the weight of the world on his shoulders. And he's an individual that has all the talent in the world, that has all the money in the world, and he's still miserable looking. And that's a great example of it, that's in society today.
And you would love to get into his inside story. maybe because he grew up in the poverty and he didn't get it good in wherever he came from.
Mm.
He's bringing that story along with him, and
I think Tony. I'm sorry for interrupting you there, but I think that because a lot of these footballers, football and boxing especially, is a working class people get into them
yeah,
sports. Football. It's
yeah,
the same in the north, the south, around the world. It's so you have all these young fellas, the likes of Rashford, Dele Alli, Gaza, Maradona, and all these people. They're coming in, but they have a lot of baggage. And some of it we know, and some of it we don't. Like with Dele Alli, now we know, okay.
yeah,
He grew up when his mother looked after him, but she was in the throes of addiction. There was people in his home using drugs, strange men, and he had all the talent in the world. He was playing for England. He was player of the year, but mentally he wasn't there, and his career declined. Jesse Lingard is another one at Man United, and Rashford. So I'm a United fan. That's why Rashford looks like he's another one, but we don't know yet. Jadon Sancho is another. These guys have the world at their feet, but they look very unhappy. But I think that maybe as we become more aware of trauma and things like that I think the professional leagues like the Premier League and maybe the smaller ones, they're going to have to support these young men that's coming into these positions with all the publicity and all the money and all the fame and the notoriety and the scrutiny, and help them deal with their underlying issues, because it's all about football. But if the individual isn't right, the football will fall away.
yeah. So what I see is people that they get to that stage and they get all this money, but like you said, they haven't dealt with the baggage. There's just more money to feed the monster. That's the way I look at it. If you look back at Georgie Best,
Mm,
probably one of the greatest players ever,
yeah.
but he couldn't make it to training. He couldn't, and that was I believe that was growing up in Belfast, and you know the crack of what happened up here, like and Georgie was from East Belfast and all the shit that went on here. I think he carried a lot of stuff into his adulthood, and it ruined him at the end of the day. Like,
It did. He retired at 27. Do you know, when you think, and when you're looking back at the videos, we've never seen anybody like that since. Do you know, he was just a unique player, a handsome looking bastard as well. I remember he,
oh,
he he was asked the question, would you rather win the Ballon d'Or and the European Cup or go out with Miss World? And he says, oh, that's easy. I've done both.
he was a phenomenal player. Like he had it all, but I think to get too far, and then there's just too much money to keep continuing feeding that beast. It's like that one that I always go back to. I'm in recovery 25 years, James, and
Fair play.
not saying I've been clean 25 years. I've hit the skids a few times, but I love that one. Is God's gift to us is all the talent, skill and ability in the world. Our gift to God is to develop all that talent, skill, and ability and apply it in your daily life.
Mm.
Some of these guys have all that all rolled into one, but they just get too far too quick, and then it just goes all pea soup. I know a lot of the boxers up here at the minute, young Anto Kakachi and all gentleman,
I love Kakachi. He's my favourite
oh,
boxer at the moment.
he's great kid, like he real down to earth gentleman, like
Very
and you'll be
exciting
shocked.
fighter. He's in wars like every time, and entertaining
Oh,
fights.
he had it tough leading up, injuries and stuff, but he's getting there now, and I know we saw him coming and like there's a lot of talent up here in Belfast. I knew a kid when I grew up was brought to Manchester United with, do you remember Philip Moran? Philip Mulryan.
He's a priest in Cork.
He is.
He is, yeah.
He lived for Norwich. He came back up home. He lived around the corner from my ma's house. Sweet that I know all his family, and but this young guy went with him to Man United at the time, and they were told from the start they were only kids. If you're caught drinking or smoking or anything, you go back home. This kid was caught drinking 3 weeks in, and he was that good that they wouldn't send him home. But
Mm,
see, the next time they caught him, sent him home. He played his life out in the Irish League, and he's on the juice now. Like it's
yeah.
just it
Remember,
goes to their head games a wee bit, and
do you know, in
you
that same generation, you also had Keith Gillespie from up north.
yeah,
Gambling
yeah.
issues he had, as well as alcohol and things.
Well, and I know Keith Gillespie, and I know of a few boxers who were good and fought for world titles and all from Belfast, and they're just on the road now. They're just drinking the bit out, and
Do you think that's a collective trauma from all the war?
I think so, James. And I think too, it's a bit of people when they get to a certain level don't know how to live.
Yeah.
It's like there's no mentors that are telling them watch for this, watch for that. It's all about money, and here's more money, here's more deals. And like I said, to get to that level, and it's they've more money to feed the beast. They can drink and take drugs and run about with all the women they want and do whatever they want. But there's nobody there, walking them along and saying, listen, watch out for this, invest your money here, do that. It's all like, let's just have this big party. Do you know what I mean?
And Tony, you mentioned you're in recovery, 25 year. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about your journey in addiction, as much as you're comfortable with, and how you got out of it? The audience for this podcast as well, there'll be people in prison will be able to access this, which is great. So we can talk directly to them, if you don't mind.
Yep. So, I was asked this a few weeks back, and I'm doing a bit of writing and stuff at the minute, sort of writing a wee book and stuff, and just about my experience, about how I build an art of it. But I get into addiction, and I was only getting in the first year of secondary school when it started for me. And how it started for me, James, was my mate's brother had an RM80 motorbike, and it was in his garden, and he took the petrol cap off, and he said to me, come here, cup your hands and breathe in and out of the petrol cap a couple of times, and always being like a gangly kid, a weird kid, never feeling like I was part of anything, or always felt different. So I went over to the petrol cap and took a few wee inhales of it, and that was it. A whole new world opened up for me. Ended up draining some petrol out and putting it in a bag, and I was sniffing it. Then it went from petrol to glue. So by the time I got into secondary school, I was already on the glue, and drinking weekends, eventually spilt out into like Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night, eventually getting into almost every night. And for me, it was a way for me to cope with all the stuff that was underneath, um, it was it was just a way that I could talk to girls. It was just a way that I could feel a part of something, standing with all the lads and doing all that there. But I could never foresee it getting out of control. You know, I came from a very strong Republican family, James. My dad was in doing a life sentence. My mom was, trying to work and look after four of us and stuff like that. So she was hardly ever home. But there was like this expectation of you because of who your parents were, that you didn't mess around in the estate, and my older siblings all sort of fell into line where I was like, nah, I have to challenge the status quo here, and there was a lot of drinking and stuff done in my home, and the older ones having parties and stuff. So I just started taking me sips and heading upstairs with tins of beer. But before I was like probably 15, I was flat out, James, flat out smoking ice at the time, dope, smoking hash, drinking, sniffing glue at every opportunity, constantly out to Lisburn, buying pints of glue, coming out of the YTP, and you got 28.50 a week. You had to give your man 15 quid. Do you know what I mean? So you had 13.50 for yourself, and I went and bought a pint of glue for me, but it was just constant. But never ever seen it being a problem until like I got to about 17, 18 maybe. And I was starting to come under the attention of the local lads and stuff. They were starting to see my behaviour getting a wee bit more erratic. I was joyriding, I was doing a bit of thieving, I was fighting, And the more I done that, the more drink and drugs I needed to take, because every time, like they called it up here joyriding. I never ever got any joy out of it. I was like the one in the car used to be sitting there trying to act like I was enjoying it, but really inside I was shitting
Do you
myself.
know who you're reminding me of now? Marley in You, Me and Marley. The fella in the middle.
Aye, but the glasses, the guy ends up dead. Aye. Well, unfortunately for myself, a few times I was in different stolen cars and just get out of them, and things happen. The guy got his neck broke, and
yeah, that's your generation, isn't it? The You, Me and Marley.
Yep.
Yeah.
So actually, see the guy, the main character in it, me and him were very, very good friends.
Oh, yeah.
Were. And unfortunately, he took his own life for a couple of years ago down to drugs, I used to go to meetings and stuff with him, and used to have a bit of crack and hang about. And me and him were writing a screenplay about all different things, and then he just took himself off again, and ended up taking his own life.
Do you know, in the movie, for people that didn't see it, it's a movie based in Belfast in the early to mid-90s, and it's about joyriding, young fellas joyriding, has great soundtrack, great music, great cars, and it's good humour. But there's the side of it then that maybe we don't have in the South, or at least to a lesser extent, is the punishment beatings from the Republicans in the community, because you don't ring the police where you're from. If there's issues like that, there's antisocial behaviour, the community go to the Republicans, they don't go to the police. And then, do you want to talk to us about what that's like?
So, for me, well, I've suffered a punishment beating. So if you look, I have what they call up here turkey teeth, right? So I had to get all my teeth and all replaced. I got a punishment beating, and I was beat for 45 minutes, and they actually took a smoke in between it, and then continued to beat me. So I lost all my teeth. My face was smashed up bad. Really, really beat the pulp. But usually, what happens, there's a thing now up here. Well, it was for a while, where you could do it by appointment. So if the boys were looking, you to come to your mother's door, say, if he's at such and such shops tonight at 7 o'clock, we'll shoot him in the knees, or we'll break his arms, or we'll break his legs. But if we have to chase him, we're going to shoot him in the knees and the ankles. So it almost happened to me a few times, but again, James, and I have to say it, because of who my family was, my dad was, I sort of got a bye ball a lot of times, but the time to give me a punishment beating, there was no bye ball. Like, I was left like the elephant man. I couldn't even see out of my eyes, and my teeth were. And here, the other thing is, I was supposed to get, well, not supposed to, I did get married 4 weeks later with a seriously rearranged face. But yes, they used to do things like throw paint over you and cover you in feathers, or make you stand in the street with a sign saying, I am a housebreaker or a joyrider, or whatever it is, whatever crime they said you'd done, you'd to stand in the middle of the street. You know what black taxis are? So it used to be at the black taxi stand where everybody was coming and going, so everybody could see you with your black card on. Or they shot you in the back of your legs and the knees, or they shot you in the ankles. And if you were really bad, they give you what we call up here a six-pack: knees, ankles, and elbows.
Fuck.
And that was the inflict the most pain ever.
Does that happen still today?
There's bits and bobs of it still going on. Not too much of it now. So there's a thing up here now called the Paramilitary Crime Task Force, and they're on the ball. If something happens, like if you're on the road and you see something happening, within seconds they're there in unmarked cars. So it doesn't happen as much, but it still happens from time to time.
Yeah. So do you know when you how did that lifestyle come to a head for you, and where did it bring you?
So through all my years of addiction, I just got away with things by the skin of my teeth so many times. And my dad just died. My dad, he got out of jail in 1990, and he died in 1999. So my dad just died, and things were starting to come down heavy on me. The boys were starting to come here, we want you. And then I took my kids to school one morning, and I was coming back, and a guy come over to me and says, I need to have the army. So I was like, right, I'll be round the house. So I went round the house, and four of them come in the back door, and just said, Republican movement, you're under arrest. If you try and about here, we've got one of them up our coats, we're going to use it. So I was tucked away in a car, James. This was after like loads of trouble, fights and all on the lead up. They had a lot of, my marriage broke up. I was getting the blame of, well, not getting the blame. I was involved in a bit of drug dealing and stuff like that. So this was just coming to the end of it. And because of my dad and all, when I was taken away for almost 2 days, and till an unknown location. Where I live here now, I'm 100% sure it was just around the corner. I could near enough pinpoint the place, but anyway, I put a pillowcase over my head, made me sit upright on my knees, and had my hands behind my back, and I've always said, it wasn't the physical stuff, it was the mental stuff. There was a crowd of guys in the room questioning me, and then leaving the room, which I thought all of them were gone. And then one guy would still be in the room, and he would do a big clap his hands or something, and I would jump, or a bit like you could hear a gun being loaded, or but no conversation while this was happening. You just had to make a story up in your head, which isn't nice, But they basically told me, ended up saying, look, we've went to town and country here, we want to punish you. They wanted to give me a six-pack, but it was coming up near, well, just shortly after the ceasefire and stuff like that there, So they couldn't really afford to punish me the way they wanted to punish me, because it would have been bad for the area and stuff like that. So they ended up, says, we went to everywhere to try and get permission to do what we wanted to do. We're not getting permission to do it, but what we are going to do is put you out of the country for a year. So I had to leave the country for a full year. I went to England for 3 months, and then I negotiated. I knew a guy in Dundalk who owned Abracadabra at the time. He said he would give me a job somewhere to live and stuff if I was allowed to go there. So I negotiated that, and I was allowed to go to Dundalk for 9 months. So I had to
Mm.
stay there for 9 months. So I wasn't allowed to pass the border at all that stuff. So in that period of time, just seeing the kids being brought down to Dundalk and the crying going back up the road, my wife was just, she was all over the place. Do you know what I mean? And my role was supposed to be supporting a family and providing for a family, but I was sort of going down the rabbit hole myself. And have you ever heard of Curcio?
No.
So Curcio is like a Catholic thing. It's like the Catholic church. It comes from a Catholic church, but it's like this weekend they bring you away. I hadn't a clue what it was, but they bring you away for a weekend and they do. I can't tell you because it's a
Yeah.
secret thing in case you ever want to do it, right?
Yeah.
They take you away and all this stuff happens and all. And on that weekend, I had what I know now as my first ever spiritual awakening.
Mm.
And I remember sitting in the room, crying my eyes out, and just going, what has my life came to? What have I done for all these years? The addiction, all the stuff that I was getting involved in, stuff that I couldn't even talk about because I
Yeah.
would end up in jail for a long, long time. Do you know what I mean?
Mm.
But just going through it all and just crying, crying, crying. And I remember just falling on my knees and just saying, God, if there's a way out of this, please just show me the way,
Mm.
And it was about 6 months, 7 months after that, I just gave up the drink. I stopped smoking blow. I was starting to go to chapel and all, do all that stuff. And
Yeah.
then when I was allowed back up, I done another double relapse. But you know what I mean? I was just flat out again, getting myself known again, getting in trouble again. And I ended up in what's now the old Shaftesbury Square Hospital in Belfast. It's closed down now. Dr. Moorhead, he was over it all. But I went in there for 6 weeks and just stopped the drinking of drugs, come out of the rehab after 6 weeks, went to NA and AA meetings, thought my life was going to change forever, and all my problems are over. But once I get out of the rehab and started going to meetings, all my problems just began,
Mm.
So I think it was getting up to the wee holy weekend and getting that wee bit of a spiritual awakening
Yeah.
sort of made me look back on everything that I was doing, everything that I'd done,
Yeah.
you know.
Do you know the term spiritual awakening for people that haven't had one, or maybe they're contemplating recovery or the fellowship and 12 steps, but maybe that's something that puts them off. A spiritual awakening is, it's not like Holy Mary comes to you, you know what I
Oh,
mean, and gives you direction, tells you what to do, or Jesus, or anything like that. It's just when you're at your lowest or at a low point in your life, it's just a glimpse of awareness where you have a bit of clarity and you can see things for what they really are. That's kind of what it is. That's what it was for me. It's like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, it's like you can go years without ever having that moment of clarity, and that's how I interpret a spiritual awakening. It's just it wakes you up to what the fuck is going on. You know, your life is passing you by.
aye, that's exactly what happened to me in that room. So it wasn't like a big flash of light or,
Mm.
like you said, or Jesus didn't come down and touch my head and cleanse me. It was just, it was just like a moment of what have I been doing? What the hell? And thinking about my wife and my kids. You know, I'm one of them people that say I was battered my whole life at home and stuff. Do you know what I mean? Just your man slapped you. That's what Irish man's did. There's no,
Yeah.
I held animosity and resentment for years, but I've let it go. But it was like looking back on it, it was, you know, I was a man that would always say I would never ever hurt my kids and I would never physically hit them. And, and I prayed myself in it,
Yeah.
and boasting and blowing about it. But then somebody in the meetings just hit me with the reality. What about all the emotional pain? What about all the psychological pain? What about everything that the witness, the cops hitting the house, the provies hitting the house,
Yeah.
drug dealers hitting the house looting money, fighting, arguing with their mummy, doing all that there, and it just makes you, that sort of thing started happening to me. And when I say a spiritual awakening, that's what I started looking at. What have I done? What have I done to my family? What have I done to my wife?
Mm.
Who's no longer my wife, and rightly so.
Yeah,
But
yeah. So you have a lot of consequences. So from your lifestyle, you weren't able to salvage everything, but you were able to turn it around as best as you could.
turned it around as best as I could, James. When I sort of settled down in recovery, I went back to school at night time. I never done school, ever. Like 14, I took myself off. I was sent to a training school, they called it up here, a boys' home. Sent to finish school in there, but I just refused to go and all this stuff. So And I lived by the narrative that it was stupid because I was always told it was stupid.
Yeah.
But I found out, that there's nothing stupid about me, and I'm a very clued in, intelligent man. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I just wasn't academically smart, maybe, but I was smart in a lot of other ways. But started going back to school, done the equivalent of two A levels. The first essay I ever wrote was from start to finish. There wasn't a full stop, a capital letter, a paragraph. It was just, and fair play to the guy who marked it. He got me in. The way he explained it to me, it's like going to get an a la carte menu. You've got a starter, a main course, and then a dessert. So you've got an introduction, your main body, and then your conclusion. And it sort of made sense. And over the years, I sharpened it up, got the equivalent of two A levels, went to university, first person in my family ever to even grace a university. I've done a degree in youth work, community youth work. And over the 3 years, just plugged away at it. Felt like an imposter the whole way through it. But I had this belief, if I get this education, everything will be all right. I got the degree, everything wasn't all right. You still have to work for your money. All the talk that they used to talk about, if you have a degree, you can do this and do that. Anyway, I still had to work for my money. So then I started realizing I wasn't stupid that way. So I went to university again. Then I went to university again. And then I just ripped the whole out of it, and I was just constantly on that like merry-go-round of educate, 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 but I wasn't getting any further. I was still plagued with imposter syndrome and this narrative that I wasn't unworthy and I was no good, and it wasn't until like a good bit into recovery that I realized, you know, stopping the drinking drugs, my life, as explained here, just got worse instead of better. But it's because I wasn't looking at the monster inside, what was talking to me on a constant basis.
Yeah.
I went from being 11 stone, getting into rehab, getting out, getting into training, getting up to 18 and a half stones, taking steroids and all, but saying I was in recovery, taking steroids, training in Muay Thai, training in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, and all I was doing, James, was arming an absolute maniac. Do you know what I mean? Because even though I said I was in recovery, I didn't really have living recovery, if that makes sense. I had recovery from drinking drugs, but living recovery, I didn't have it, where I have a lot of living recovery today, a lot of compassion, firstly, for myself,
Yeah.
then the others. And I had to learn, what is the saying? Compassion without self-compassion is no compassion at all. I can be compassionate to everybody, the man on the street, the man addicted to drugs, the man in prison. I can be compassionate to everybody, but when it came to myself, that compassion was missing,
And
and until I learned.
it's a good point for people in prison, because if you're in prison and you're in there and maybe you feel guilty about what you did, maybe you don't, and that's fine too, but maybe you do, or maybe you feel guilty not about what you did or why you're in, but maybe you feel guilty because you're not there for your wife or your kids, and you feel guilty about that, or you're missing milestones, birthdays, and things like that. But beating yourself over your back with a rod forever is not going to help you. And at some stage, you have to have the compassion for yourself and just look at your life and say, you know what? I was born into a shithole, or I was born into a situation where my dad was a Republican, he was doing life, or my dad was a drug dealer and he was doing prison, or we were born into poverty where there was no father around, or and it's not looking for excuses, but it's just looking to look back and realize all this context was impacted on my life choices, and to understand that, he says, you know what, I'm not a fucking bad person. I know I'm not a bad person. I'm a decent person. I'd help the lads on the landing, or I'd help anybody know about it. Because you know yourself, some of the best people you'll ever met was people that have been in prison.
Yeah,
But at some stage, you have to make peace with what you did and who you were, enabled to be able to move past it.
it's like you said, James, you grew up in a tough environment, you have to be tough. The way I used to think about it was, if you can't be tough, you get sent to a shop for the newspapers and the skins, and the beers and stuff. So you had to be tough. You grew up in an environment where everything was tough. You had to survive. You had to not let, if somebody pushed you, you pushed them back 10 times harder. All that stuff. And if you grow up from this size and that's what you're being taught, that's how you're going to live. But if you look back on your life and realize, if you grew up in a very nurturing, loving environment, you'd be a totally different story to
Mm.
where you are today. So basically, I'm not saying we make bad choices, but if you look back on your environment and how you grew up, and this is for guys in prison, I tell all the guys that I work with this here is if you knew better, you would have done better.
It's
See
true.
the nights you sit in your cell, putting your own head away, maybe full of guilt and remorse and shame for the things that you've done, to maybe get drugs or the counters you jumped over to take money off people. Do you know, if you're in that moment of turning that round in your head, going, "What have I done? You know, I'm a disgrace and full of shame," whatever else. If you look back on your life from when you were small and realize that the environment you grew up in was tough, so you had to be tough. If you had grew up in a more uh, softer environment, you wouldn't be sitting in the prison cell with your hands in your head. You'd be doing your university and progressing on in life. You know,
You spoke
it's
about
cool.
you spoke about doing a lot of education, even though you felt you weren't naturally gifted in academia. But you make a good point, because there's a perception out there that to go to university you have to be a fucking genius, so you have to be extremely smarter than most people, but you don't. You just have to turn up, and you just have to read what they ask you to read and just try. And that's it, really. Like, you don't need, it's not just for geniuses, it's not just for rich people or for posh people, it's for everybody of all levels. And if you have challenges around dyslexia or ADHD or autism or anything like that, there's a amount of supports there that's available. No, they'll give you technology and laptops, they'll give you specific exam rooms, there's grants and fundings, and like, there's so many opportunities there for people wanting to turn their life around, and there's a variety of courses as well. And like you, I did a youth and community work 3-year degree as well, and I did the masters in criminology, and I'm still studying now. But you made a good point. I'm doing my PhD now in criminology, but you make a good point. I thought that, first of all, I started out with a level 3, which is a very basic computer course. Then I did
Yeah.
a level 5, which is like an A level, but it was in psychology and social studies. But in my mind, it was like, I'll just do this course now and then I get a job. But I kept moving the goalpost when I achieved my goal. And you touched on it there. It doesn't matter. What I found was, and I know when I get this PhD under my belt in 3 years, it's not going to, like, when I graduate it, I'm not going to feel amazing about myself. I'll be proud of what I did. But in the end of the day, once that graduation is over and you come home and that goes up in the wall, you're still the same person you were before you started. But it will help you, like, to get a job or professional stuff like that. But if you're doing it to make yourself feel happy or to make yourself feel worthy, it's not that type of a thing. Do you know what I mean? You will feel empty after if that's what you're trying to do, you know?
And that's brilliant, because that's the way I was feeling, empty, and just realizing, you know, that what I was trying to fill up in here was that I'm not stupid and I'm worthy. But because of that, and I look back at my education, I did a master's in criminology, I did a master's in youth justice as well. Do you know, I look back on it and go, I was trying to prove externally to people, looking for validation, but I don't need it. I only need my own validation. And just on the point that you were saying, when I first started, I was given a computer with a thing called Grammarly on it. So when I
Mm.
was writing, this was cracking my writing and putting in, you know, putting it into paragraphs and commas and full stops, things that I haven't got a clue about. But there's also now, if there's levels of dyslexia, so some people are really extreme, some people are very low down. I was just in the middle, you know. But they've got this new thing. I seen a guy had it, and it's like you plug this wee microphone in. So rather than you typing, you talk into the microphone and it does the typing for you. So no people that go, I wouldn't know how to write what's in my head and
Mm.
stuff like that. Or you just speak and this does the writing for you. Like it's amazing. It's amazing what's out there now, James. And that's why
Yeah.
I always say there, guys, you know, my experience of I experienced prison twice in my life, and I don't ever want to experience it again, you know. And then I worked in the prisons for 5.5 years up in the north here. You know, I don't even know how I get in, because my dad was a lifer, my brother was, you know, the same, and then I had my own prison number and
They,
stuff.
they
But I
were
get in,
probably they were probably afraid to say no to you.
but I get in, but you know, I was there from 2013, and in 2018, I was escorted off the prison estate, and it was because it was apparently I was a security risk. After 5 years, I was a security risk. When I questioned it and I went to Sinn Féin up here, I know a few of the councillors up here says, like, see what's going on here. So basically, KSNI says it was a security risk. I think it's because I was trying to help the lads too much. You know, I was too involved in trying to get the guys from A to B, you
Yeah.
know, and giving them all the ways to do things. And so when they phoned up and looked into it, they said they had soft evidence of me associating with dissident Republicans. Now, up in Belfast at the minute, it's like alphabet soup, right?
Mm.
There's new IRA, there's the old IRA, there's this IRA.
Sarah and fucking all them.
But you could be talking to a shopkeeper, you could be talking to two of your mates from school walking up the road. You don't know if they're at their lark or if they're not. So basically, I've been seen in the company of somebody, and the soft evidence was get them out, you know. Now, I've been back in the prisons from that with Fritzy and stuff when she was over doing the compassion trauma circles and stuff like that. So I was in McGilligan and I was in Hayback women's prison and the young men's prison. So, but McGabry, because it's a category A, I don't know what way that'll go, but you know, I'll keep pushing because, you know, I know my worth. I know I'm not involved in any of that stuff anymore. And
yeah.
so I'm not going to be pushed down for something that I'm not involved in that sense, you know. Got a voice now is probably what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, you do, but it's disappointing. It's disappointing because it sounds like you were doing good work in there, and there's no better person than somebody with a background like your own to be in there helping people. So hopefully they rethink that. But we've about a minute left. Is there anything you'd like to add, or maybe have you any words of wisdom or encouragement for somebody just maybe thinking about turning it around? Maybe they're in addiction or they're not, or they're in prison or they're not, or they're just maybe in a bad place and they're trying to imagine a new life.
Yep. So I would just suggest tell them just be gentle with yourself and start. You know, you've been harsh with yourself for all these years. If you're in addiction or you're sitting in prison, you've been harsh in your own mind, talking to yourself. Just try and be gentle. Try and change the narrative slightly and encourage yourself because obviously, you know, at this point, not a lot of people are encouraging themselves. Try and encourage yourself a wee bit better. But just remember this, and this is something that really changed me too, James, was that line from Gabor Mate when he says, you know, trauma is not what happened to you. It's what happened inside of you as a result of what happened to you. So basically, I've had traumatic events in my life right back when I was a kid, all different things, abuse, the whole 9 yards. I don't mind talking about it because I've worked through it, right? They were the traumatic event. So the trauma happened inside me and it happened this way. It told me I was a loser. I wasn't worth anything. I was a piece of shit. I'm never going to amount to anything. But until I changed that story, nothing else changed.
And what kind of work are you doing today, Tony?
I deliver the trauma talks in the community. I try and get people into employment. So I work through, take some of the guys up from the turnaround project, and I do the lived experience stuff on top of that there. But mostly I work with people struggling with addiction or, you know, they just have that story going on and they don't seem to get on in life. So I do a wee bit of one-to-one work outside of my own work as well. I just try and help as many people as I can, James, you know, because I remember being in that dark hole and back then nobody really had a clue about all this stuff, you know. So
and it's what you're doing as well. All those negative experiences are now your strongest asset. What you bring to the work you're doing.
They're the strength now. I used to look at my past and let it hold me back. I look at it now and go, me, that was training me for what I'm doing today. It's the biggest asset I have. And I swear to God, James, everything that's ever happened to me, and that's the abuse and everything. If I could go back and if Jesus appeared in front of me and says, what would you like to change? Nothing.
Yeah.
Absolutely nothing, because it's learned me looking into your shadow and into your most darkest places will bring out your greatest light. It'll tell you more about you than anything.
Yeah. Tony, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for your time.
James, thank you for letting me share my story, and sure, I'll catch up with you in the new year, mate.
Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Slán, lad. God bless.
Good stuff from your family. Take care, bud.
Slán.